So a couple of weeks ago in our department head meeting, city manager mentioned that some folks who are on Owasco Lake were in the city hall had some questions about Owasco Lake elevation and why the height of the lake is where it is. And I raised my hand and said I would be happy to come in and give a quick presentation on that. In fact, for those of you who participated in the Bob Brower Scientific Symposium, I apologize because this is the identical presentation that I gave this spring. But I might skip a couple of parts because I kind of get into some emergency management protocols and practices unless you guys want to hear a little bit about dam safety as well. Happy to go into more detail. So at that presentation in March, the Bob Brower Scientific Symposium, I can't remember exactly how many people joined, maybe 100 to 150. So about 200 people in this Zoom style presentation, and I had an idea to do a poll, which once I got in and I actually started talking about this poll during the presentation, I started to get nervous because I'm like, what are the results going to be? And I'm here sitting in my office all by myself, and how am I going to respond to adverse results of said poll? So I asked the audience, in general, is the normal summer elevation of Owasco Lake too high, too low, just right? Or some folks were on for professional development credit hours, might not live on the lake, non-applicable. Went on with the presentation, got to the end, opened up the results, and out of the 200 plus or minus participants, about 70% of the folks replied that the elevation was just right. You know, there was a handful of folks who said no comment, and then about 10 to 15 said it was too high, 10 to 15 said it was too low. And that's generally been the consensus that we've seen over the last 7 or 8 years, is for every one person who wants the lake level a little bit higher, there's that equal part in a different part of the lake who would like it the opposite direction. So it was interesting to see those results and you know, hopefully validate a lot of the work that John West, who's here today as well, for moral support, and if I get myself jammed up, help answer some deeper rooted questions. Our goal that was presented in March is to effectively manage Owasco Lake elevation as safe as we possibly can, and in accordance with the Army Corps rule curve. And for the members of the public who might be asking, what is the Army Corps rule curve? It was a document developed back in the 1980s by the U.S. Army Corps Engineers that gave the city of Auburn and Owasco Lake target elevations to reach at various times throughout the year. That dark red line is the elevation that we try to achieve or shoot for throughout the course of the year. So you begin the year January 1st, you're at 710. And the reason you're drawn down to 710 is that's the cold time of year. In the past or typical year, you get a lot of snowpack built up within the watershed. As you guys all know, the watershed to lake ratio is one of the highest of the Finger Lakes. So you're basically building yourself a buffer for that spring melt in rains that come in the spring, so that you're not at 713 and all of a sudden you have a melt, spring rains, and you're trying to discharge 4,000 or 5,000 CFS down through the river, which is extremely unsafe, not to mention the flooding that would probably occur on the lake. So that's kind of that winter buffer that we have developed by the Army Corps to allow us to fill that lake back up by about 3 feet in the spring. And we generally try to track and follow this rule curve the best that we can. So last winter, one of the interns that we hired at DMU went through and said, well, how are we doing with our past performance? So she took all the USGS gauge data, elevation data, and plotted it over the last 14 years. And the blue line is the Army Corps rule curve, and the black line is the average lake elevation at that given time over the past 14 years. To drill in a little bit closer, we looked at the last 3 years, and that's a little bit easier for people to remember what happened 3 years ago versus 14, at least for me. It's a lot easier. 2019, we had a record drought, 100-year drought. 2021, we had a 100-year flooding event. And through record drought, record flooding event, we barely dipped underneath the rule curve, and we just maxed over the top of the rule curve because of Hurricane Frederick. So John's doing a fantastic job keeping with the rule curve. It's certainly complex, and I hit on that a little bit. As part of that analysis, the intern looked at, Taya Closter, Taya looked at, not the intern, that's not very nice of me. You know, we looked at number of days the Owasco inlet discharge volume was low, you know, under 15 CFS, which is barely a trickle of water coming into the lake, which means the lake is impossible to maintain at your summer elevation. You're going to see a decline in lake elevation when you just don't have the inflow coming into the lake. In 2016 and 2020, you know, number of days, over 100 days, less than 20 CFS coming into the lake, and we're mandated by law to have a minimum of 30 CFS leaving the lake. General rule of thumb is the inlet flow is about 50% of the total contribution of flow into the lake. So when it's less than 15 CFS, and say we hit that 30 CFS, so on those dry years when we've got 100 days of under 15 CFS, that lake is just inherently, unfortunately, we're not able to hold that elevation up near 713 or 712.75, where folks generally expect it through the summer months. Then on the flip side, you can see, you know, going back to 2010, there wasn't one day looking back over the last 12 years, or the first 6 years, that we had a discharge of 2,000 CFS, and in the last 4 out of 5 years, we've had days, sometimes multiple days, over 2,000 CFS, which is an all-hands-on-deck situation. Emergency management protocols are underway. Severe flooding throughout the city of Auburn is happening, downstream flooding, and likely lake elevation rising over 713, and potentially some flooding of shoreline properties at that point. I wish this graphic, I should have switched this out. It's a little pixelated, I apologize. You just close your eyes and imagine John's face in the center of that picture instead of that guy. And those are, generally most of those fingers are me. Because, you know, you gotta keep it at 712.75 for the summer, John. Don't violate our speedies permit, John. You know, manage that flow at 350 CFS so we can maximize our hydro output, John. Fire department calls need swift water rescue training, so we bump up the river flows for that. A lot of projects over the last 6 years have taken place in Auburn, specifically in and around the river. Those projects require a ton of coordination with our department around flows for pouring concrete, putting in barriers, putting in all sorts of different things, working within and around the river. All at the same time of looking back those, you know, 3 to 6 years and still maintaining or generally matching that rule curve the whole time. It's an effort that is certainly commendable. I appreciate everything John's done to meet those goals and keep the community safe, and be able to work around the confines of construction and different injects that we have throughout the year. So that's generally my presentation, unless you guys want me to go into emergency action planning. But I thought I would just kind of stick to the lake elevation for tonight.
Council, so far we're good?
It's up to you.
No. Seth, will you take a couple of questions?
Absolutely, Mayor. Yes.
Council, anyone? Councilor Castro.
Are you responsible for the overall elevation of the lake? Or who is?
So the state dam, this is a picture of the state dam. This is the primary outfall from Owasco Lake. And we manage the gate at State Dam that ultimately results in flow down the river and out of the lake. We do that with the confines of the rule curve that was set out for us to try to target and hit by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we do manage the lake elevation, but we manage it to the rule curve using this structure.
Who is we?
Our water filtration plant staff, primarily. John West, Sam Granato, Brian Pokovich, Jamie Nye.
Right, but there has to be one go-to person who ultimately calls the shot.
Yes, generally that would be John West. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well said, Councilor.
But if something happens, it's me. You can yell at me. Don't yell at John.
So
Okay. Or
it's probably
Jeff.
better off going to you and you go to John, so there's a chain of command.
Correct.
So you're
Or Jeff. You can yell at Jeff, maybe.
Boy, we're doing a lot of finger pushing here.
It's a bureaucratic
So
shuffle.
if in a week we get a flood and I get a call, I want
Yeah, you can give me a call.
Have-
Absolutely.
have Councilor, have him call John.
Yeah.
Whichever one you can track down.
So I should probably get 5 numbers here so I can. Just kidding.
You know, one other thing I'll skip down to, you reminded me, I think this is an important item for folks to watch, especially if you're out in the lake and you're wondering what the heck's going on with my lake elevation. And even for the community that's right up along the river, right downstream of the river or along the river and through the city of Auburn. There are great tools out there for the community to stay informed. I have what's called River Flows on my phone. It's a free app. John uses River Data Lite. It's a free app. You download that app and then you can basically drill into this map over here, which is the USGS gauge stations throughout the state of New York. And you can click on any one of those gauge stations that you would like that app to reference. And at any given point in time in the day, you can open up that app and those points that you'd like to know what the flow or what the elevation of the lake is, it tells you real time. Sometimes it goes down, but generally that's what we use. In the event of an emergency, when that goes down and we don't know what's going on, there's numbers you can call in to get elevation reads that you then have to go to charts to determine what the CFS flows are. The other outstanding mechanism that we've been able to partner with and utilize is the Reach of Aula. Great volunteer organization. Anybody who is a member of Aula or just likes them on Facebook, because I liked them on Facebook before I became a member, and they let me like them. Mr. West periodically, and it all depends on what's going on with the weather, is providing Aula and other members periodic email updates, and Aula takes that information that John sends in the form of an email, posts it on Facebook from the city of Auburn. You know, rain in the forecast today, opening up the gate to 300 CFS to try to get ahead of the 2 inches of rain that are expected in the watershed this afternoon. It's just a really good forecasting method. It's helped us out tremendously. I think at one point in time, lake elevation was one of the #1 city manager, 911 city manager phone calls. Hey, what's going on with the lake? Through the communication tool. The effectiveness of John's communication along with Aula's acceptance and relaying that message through their Facebook page has been absolutely tremendous. So that's another resource or tool.
And Seth, those links are quick links on our city's webpage. It is a great tool. And for our river, there's a point that's right behind the station on across from Wegmans.
That's
and
right.
You can, it's kept up to date daily.
Yeah.
So you can find that information easily on our city's website as well.
Thank you, Chuck.
Councilor Castro, you also?
All set, sir, thank you.
Councilor Genatino?
Thank you, Mayor. Oh, Seth, what is the current lake level today? Do you know?
John would know off the top of his head.
7/12/45.
712.
And are we at
4 and
minimum?
5.
Are we at minimum outflow now?
We're down somewhere around 40-ish.
So very close.
Okay.
About as close as we like to get. We want
Yeah,
to.
you start close a little too much, now you get below 30, you're kind of in an area where, and your inflow is down, like you talked about, that 15, it's about 15 coming in. So if an inch of rain were to fall tonight, it would literally be gone.
Here's a quick example. So we have State Dam up here controlling flow through the river. The flow then goes down under Lake Gap Bridge, Mill Street Pond, has to go through Mill Street, over Mill Street Dam. Right now, flow's too low, hydro's off, so there's no flow going through the hydro. Everything's going through the dam, and we're achieving 40 CFS right now. Last year, a gentleman dropped something on these amyl gates. These amyl gates work like a big pivot. They're all based on head pressure behind them, and they open up more as more pond builds up behind them and more flow goes through them. Well, we were down near minimum flow. Gentleman dropped something on the gate, went down there to retrieve it, stepped on it, and it just tweaked it enough to put us down under 30 CFS, which then in turn, we're in violation with our speedies permit, which goes into a whole nother level of reporting with the state from our wastewater treatment plant. So we try, 40 is the bare minimum that we try to hover around. We like to be a little bit over 30. We can't be perfectly 30 because we'll be in violation all the time, and we'll end up with a consent order potentially from the state with our speedies permit. So.
All set.
No, Seth. Seth, I'm going to show how dumb I am, but I'm going to ask a question in my own way. The lake level is set by the Army Corps of Engineers. The guideline as to what the lake level should be, am I correct?
That's correct, Mayor.
And I know in the past, we've had storms come through, and as a proactive measure, we've allowed a larger flow out of the lake, expecting a rainfall. That's not a normal course of action, that's more of a preventative type of action taken by our staff.
Correct.
In the Army Corps of Engineers, Billy Lupian was always quoted, and I believe it, for every inch of rainfall in our watershed, it would raise the level of the lake 1 foot. So I'm guessing that's a pretty good rule of thumb. It's a Billy Lupian quote, and I'm repeating it.
Today, no, if an inch of rainfall, no, not much is gonna happen, 'cause it's so dry.
Not much is
But
good.
as a rule of thumb, in a general, when you're generally in a, normal situation, it could be if you do nothing. If
Right.
you react, you don't
Okay,
react. But if an inch falls tonight, I do nothing, not much happens.
okay.
So, right, and vice versa, you get into the non-growing season, there's, nothing, so you get an inch of rain, it could be more, and you've had a lot of rain.
I'm glad this is on tape. Mr. Lupian will be calling you tomorrow. So.
Yeah, you just have to tell
Thank
them.
you.
It depends.
That's always
It
been a
depends.
general rule of thumb.
Seth, I've heard quite a bit too about the inlet down in Moravia. Where talk a little bit about that. Where does that water come from? And is it a concern with our lake? You know, in far as raising the level of our lake because of the inlet?
So from a lake elevation standpoint, we utilize the inlet as an indicator of what we should be outflowing in order to keep the lake perfect where it's at, or whether we want it to trend downward or upward. We often use that flow coming into the inlet. 50% of the watershed is south of the lake. You know, a good, I don't know if it's exactly 50%, but a good portion of our watershed is south of our lake. So definitely the land use practices in the southern part of the lake should be of concern, right? Because of, that's a gross 50% of the contribution of sediment, 50% of the contribution of water flow into the lake is coming from the south end of our watershed. Generally speaking, you know, a good portion of the southern part of our watershed is kind of mountainous, hilly, woody, you know, wood lots, the hills of Moravia, but they have really struggled over the past few years with these wet weather events. There's no doubt about that. The inlet itself was channelized, I believe, by the Army Corps of Engineers. I may be fibbing there. It could have been a different organization as part of a flood relief program back a number of years ago. You know, Moravia does, they struggle with flooding. There's no doubt about it.
Councilor, anything else? Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.